Do the intro. Intro?
I'm waiting for... Yep, I'm intro.
For people's poll.
Oh, you're introing, are you?
I don't mind. I can do it if you want.
Are you capable?
Oh, yeah, I'm capable. I can do the normal one. I just can't do the Clayton and James one.
All right, go on then.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Clayton.
Speak to the mic. My name's James.
How are we?
He's sitting in the studio. He's like, I've got to look at the camera. You haven't got to look at the camera. Just talk to the mic.
It's polite to look at our audience when
if
I
you
introduce...
turned the mic that way then and sat back, you could do that, couldn't you?
What do you mean? Like that?
Yeah.
That's what I was doing, no?
If you say so.
Hello, everybody.
People's poll, everyone. A bit of an England theme at the moment because it's an interlull, so what else are we going to talk about? And I thought, well, we'll end up talking about Carsley and all that nonsense tomorrow. Let's do a bit of old England. So the People's Poll vote this week was give you a choice of 4 previous England era managers. I guess generally considered failures, probably all 4 of them for different reasons. You decided not to vote for Steve McLaren, the Wally with the Brolly. You decided not to vote for Kevin Keegan, who epically resigned immediately after losing to Germany in the final game at Wembley. You didn't vote for Glenn Hoddle, who was potentially onto good things, but had a faith healer and made some very silly comments about reincarnation that led to him getting binned from the job. You voted for Don Fabio Capello. And we'll be talking about the Italian great, and I think it's fair to say Italian great in terms of management on this podcast, and primarily, obviously, him as England manager. What's your memories, Clates?
So this is the thing. I don't have the greatest memory in real time.
We know that.
Yeah, it's just greatest memory, full stop. But in terms of actual real time, like the timeline of events, I have very scarce memory. So a lot of it is like going back and researching and it prompting things. Like my only memory I've got from his era that I actually remember in the time was the defeat against Germany, the 4-1. And I think that's largely because of the Lampard goal, to be honest, more than...
We'd have got battered anyway.
Correct. But yeah, I've got a very scarce memory of it. And it was one of them when I was doing my research. You sent me a great article with a timeline of events of Capello's era. It was like, oh, okay, I remember bits and bobs around that, but had to have it pieced together for me, to be honest. What are some of your memories?
Shocking 2010. I think Fabio Capello. I think Jabulani.
Okay, yeah.
Although when you say to me Fabio Capello, I still think first and foremost of Gazzetta Football Italia and his AC Milan team, which were outstanding. And that had held him at kind of the top table of world-class managers pretty much all through the 90s. His England story actually begins in the early 2000s because he was interested in taking the job when Sven was appointed.
When you say he was interested, as in he publicly said...
Apparently there was talks and his name had been mentioned, but the FA decided to go with Sven. I don't know if they'd decided that they wanted a profile of manager that was familiar with Italian football at that time. It was after Kevin Keegan, so it was pretty much on the floor. I think if you think back about Sven and Capello as personalities, very different.
Yep.
Sven... rest his soul's obviously gone now, but is remembered despite, perhaps tactical inflexibilities and stuff.
Remembered as a gentleman.
Warm, friendly.
Yeah.
That, although a lot of the patrons wanted to pick out that I said that a few weeks ago about Sven, and they were like, Sven off the pitch, you watch him, slide dog.
Okay.
But no, I think people had good things to say about Sven. He was warm. You felt like you could listen to him and stuff. Capello was that
stern
kind of rule of, in between was obviously the Wally with the Brolly, Steve McLaren. So after Sven, the FA wanted to go back to English. That didn't really work. So it was on the floor again, as it was when Sven was approached. And I don't know if it was a case that Capello had been in their thoughts all that way through, going back to when Sven was appointed. And there was no doubt in terms of CV, etc. Capello, in terms of what he'd achieved in club football, great. But I feel like the game was evolving more to a newer generation, and what would work really well for Capello in the 90s was getting frowned upon a little bit more now, this kind of rule of, it's supposedly banned ketchup and stuff. I saw an interview last night with Ben Foster on another podcast where he spoke about Capello getting the arse of him because Foster's wife had gone into labour, and Capello was like, "Are you going to go?" And Foster was like, "Yeah, of course I'm going to go." So his missus had the baby that night, and then the registration people at the FA had got in touch with Foster and said, "Look, the manager wants to play you in the second half tomorrow night." It was only a friendly. But obviously for the goalkeepers who weren't number one at the time, if you had the chance to play for England, you wanted to do it. So his missus was like, "Yeah, go back, go back." So he goes back the next day. Capello never brought him on.
Oh.
So afterwards he was like, "Yeah, fuck that, I ain't playing for you no more."
Yeah, that's not great.
So it was things like that. And apparently when he came back, Capello never asked how the kid was, or did it go all right, or congratulations, or nothing like that.
So culturally, there was a big difference. You spoke about potentially them wanting a profile that knew the Italian league when they were getting Sven. What do you think that was about?
I just think winning Italian football's in our psyche as winning football, or at least was, I think. And ultimately, I often say this about international football. You come down to your results. What do you remember about Capello? We got twatted by Germany.
That's what sticks in my brain.
So England had gone through 2 real failed periods with Keegan was out of his depth. McLaren was a great coach, but not a great manager, I don't think. Where they reverted in a period of crisis to go to big name winner. Whereas after Capello, they've obviously taken the English route since, but it's only been 2 managers since, really, when you think about it. We're obviously about to have a third soon, which might still be Lee Carsley, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. Where they've not gone back down that foreign route. They might now. I mean, as we stand now, Thomas Tuchel is the odds-on favourite.
Is he odds on? Wow, okay.
He is, yeah. I mean, don't laugh at the back, but Pep Guardiola is second in the betting. I would suggest someone's being very naughty there. And don't get your hopes up about that, kids, would be the advice. So Capello gets offered the job late 2007 after England have disastrously failed to qualify for Euro 2008 after this humbling 3-2 victory at home to Croatia. In hindsight, we went out to, in the group stage, a team that was very good in that Croatia with a very young Luka Modric, and Russia were in our group who, with the likes of Andrea Sharvin, got to the semi-finals of the Euro. So it was a tough group, but we should still be making it, right? Especially when it was top 2 qualified.
Can you remember how you were feeling around the time when...
when England lost to Croatia, that was as low as I ever felt supporting England.
I meant more in terms of what type of manager you wanted. Did you mind whether it was a foreign manager, English?
I had no problem with the idea of foreign, because the last 2 English managers hadn't worked in McLaren and Keegan. It was like, you looked at the Premier League, and I think you still do it a bit now. It's like, if you're going to go English, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
And it was like that then. All the top clubs all had overseas managers, right? So what would you been picking from at the time, like Harry Redknapp, who people really pushed for when Hodgson got the job, Alan Kirbishley. Those are the sort of names you'd have been talking about at the time, I think, if it was an English manager.
Were you then so you obviously spoke about your memories of Capello being AC Milan. I think the season before he became England manager, he won La Liga with Real Madrid. Were you excited by that?
I can't remember. I think probably not, because he took over at a time when the forthcoming summer was going to be a major tournament and we hadn't qualified.
True.
So it felt like a whole build till the first set of qualifiers in September. That December to September period didn't really matter. So in terms of excitement, there was nothing that Capello was going to do in the first 9 months that were relevant, basically. He'd had some indifferent results in the friendlies. We beat Switzerland in his first game. Jermaine Genius scored and assisted. Then I think we lost to France in a friendly. With friendlies, it's irrelevant. The big one obviously comes up with the qualifier once we start again against Croatia, the rematch. They're the team that's beat us. We're all up for it. And this time, the way the qualifying worked, you knew it was only top 1 went through, because this was qualification for World Cup, and it was going to be pretty much us and Croatia to win the group. The rest of the teams in that group were pretty weak. We played in Zagreb. Croatia had never lost a qualifier in Zagreb at the time. And Capello picked a young Theo Walcott, who had developed somewhat since his 2006 call-up from Sven-Goran Eriksson. Played on the right, scored a hat-trick. and England won 4-1. They were 1-0 up and Croatia had a man sent off, but they took the game away from them. Wayne Rooney was particularly outstanding if you ever watched the highlights of it. One of his best performances for England. Walcott got a hat-trick. 1-4-1 in Croatia. Great. And you think, this is...
Like you said, they'd never lost there in qualifying as well.
Yeah, I think always, if you'd have offered England fans a draw prior to that, you'd have taken it, I think.
Wow.
Croatia had beaten us home and away. They'd never lost a home qualifier. That on paper was the toughest away game. You'd probably say, yeah, we'll take the draw and we'll do them at Wembley, hopefully later in the tournament. England done quite well in the qualifiers. Fast forward a year, the rematch with Croatia at Wembley. England were in a position where they probably only needed a draw. And then to win their final game, which might have been against Belarus. So a draw would have been fine. It also would have been fine when we played Croatia 2 years earlier, though. That night when we lost 3-2, that was all we needed, was a draw. And we lost at home to them. I went. A very rare night. I went and watched England, and England were outstanding. Beat Croatia 5-1 at Wembley.
Nice.
Destroyed them. It's worth saying Modric didn't play. He wasn't fit. But it was it felt like a more vibrant England team that night. Aaron Lennon played on the right, was really good. So it was in both qualifiers, the right winger had really done the damage. He'd won a penalty and assisted a goal for Steven Gerrard in the first half. Gerrard got 2, Lampard got 2, Rooney got the 5th. Demolished them. It was really good. If you ever watch it back as well, you can tell the atmosphere at Wembley is different to when you watch a qualifier now. Everyone was really up for it. In the ground that night, it felt like a club vibe atmosphere. Like it was important.
So I'm guessing the vibe in that period then, considering where English football was, like you said, not qualifying for 2008, the vibes must have been quite good. And like English supporters must have been behind Capello, what he was doing with some of the results there.
Well, he'd essentially had... in basically a 2-year period, 2 big games, and he'd won them 4-1 and 5-1.
Yeah, like how can you not get behind that? What was the style of football like?
I think everyone thought it would be really pragmatic, but again, the 2 big games we had, we won 4-1 and 5-1.
Yeah, and
you couldn't, when you looked at the England team at the time with the likes of Rooney, Gerrard, Lampard, if he was playing with like a Defoe up front, Darren Bent was kind of breaking into the team and playing a bit. There were players on the pitch who were going to score goals for you, no doubt about it, whether it was like Lennon or Walcott on the right. I think James Milner had started getting integrated into the squad. Ashley Young was coming through as well. So there was a lot of good attacking players. You could only hold that back so much. And there was still plenty of experience defensively with likes of Ashley Cole, John Terry, Rio Ferdinand. With the captaincy, he'd given Terry, Ferdinand and Gerrard all a chance as captain.
As in, you're going to have it for one game, you're going to have it for one game?
I don't know if it was 1 game or 2 games each. I can't remember. It might have been like a camp. It was like Ferdinand's going to do these 2, then Gerrard's going to do these 2. Or it was just 1. I can't remember. But he gave them all the opportunity.
Who was the captain prior to him?
From McLaren's era, probably Bex,
okay.
I'm going to guess.
Sure.
But then Bex was originally dropped by Capello, by McLaren. And then McLaren brought him back in as kind of like a saviour when we were in trouble. And he did nearly save us again. And then I think Capello originally wasn't picking him either. And then also brought him back into the fold. So, but the permanent captain before that, I guess, was Bex, or it might have even been Michael Owen, maybe.
Okay.
Possibly. Who was our captain in 2006? Beckham was captain.
It was more just to understand if he'd kind of gone and done anything rogue to change it up with this new approach.
No, not particularly. Other than, like I said, he gave all 3 of those players a chance. He ultimately decided to go with John Terry, who, whatever you think of him, the human in terms of his on-field leadership, wasn't really in question. He'd obviously been very successful with Chelsea as their captain, etc. But Capello had to strip him of the captaincy himself after some revelations were brought forward in tabloid newspapers. Revelations which are still to this day, as far as I've been able to research, still denied and not confirmed as accurately true. But as the legend of the story goes, John Terry was supposedly having it off with Wayne Bridge's ex-wife.
Yep.
Which Wayne Bridge was part of the England setup at the time, back up to Ashley Cole. You can imagine it didn't go down too well. Wayne Bridge at this point wasn't at Chelsea. He was at Manchester City by this point.
They played each other, didn't they? Wasn't there the
Only
whole
like a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was such a big story.
I remember that. Yeah.
And Terry offered his hand out and Wayne Bridge turned it down.
Yep.
And it became like, I mean, it would have been heightened even more now with social media because it was only kind of just starting the roundabouts then. But became like Team Bridge versus Team Terry and stuff like that. Carlos Tevez, I read a quote from Carlos Tevez. It was like, if he did that, if he was in the Argentina squad and Terry had done that, he'd be dead.
Yeah, I could have finished that sentence for you, knowing what was about to come out there.
Tevez was admittedly at the time Wayne Bridge's teammate. City won at Chelsea that day. They won 4-2. Their first win at Stamford Bridge in 17 years, actually. But yeah, it was a circus around it. All that waiting, it was the most anticipated handshake in like Premier League history. Was Wayne Bridge going to shake his hand or not? That became like the event and the build-up and stuff. And supposedly, City Chiefs were still trying to convince Bridge to shake Terry's hand.
Why?
As the teams were going out.
Wonder
Bridge
why.
was like, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I don't blame
I
him.
think they wanted to go down a company line of, rise above it and stuff. Don't want to shake his hand, don't shake his hand, right? I think they might have played each other again a few more times. I don't think they shook hands then either. Apparently, they all live quite close, but they don't live. I think they all live in the Surrey area now, which includes Bridge's ex-wife. So reportedly, legend of story goes that they'd separated. Bridge obviously moved up to Manchester. His missus didn't follow. They separated. Terry started going to see her. It's never proven if anything ever went further than that or not. But there was an injunction out to try and stop the story being published in the media, which, okay, read between the lines, whatever you want from that. It came out, and ever since, and it's still maintained to this day, as far as I'm aware, complete silence from all sides on it.
Yeah, I can't find anything conclusive either.
No.
But that was, like you said, there was stuff going on in his private life, and that's why he was stripped of the England captaincy, right?
So if he didn't do anything, why was he stripped of the captaincy as well? Okay, fine.
Who was the replacement?
I think it was Rio Ferdinand, I think, from memory. And then there's obviously this build to the 2010 World Cup. Rio got injured for the 2010 World Cup. It was an absolute mess at centre-back because he had Terry. Michael Dawson got a call-up but hadn't really featured. Matthew Upson had always been considered kind of an understudy. Terry and Ferdinand were obviously meant to be partners at centre-back, and that had been kind of long-standing from sort of 2006 or so. At their peak, they were outstanding together as a centre-back pairing. Capello called up Ledley King, who Ledley was well documented in terms of his knees and stuff. So obviously he goes and joins up for England. They try and explain the situation to Capello. Capello's like, you go out and train. Ledley's like, you want me to train? That's fine. I can't play. Yeah. Because I'm going to be fucked for a week if I train.
How did that conversation go
so
down?
Capello's like, what are you talking about? So Capello just didn't get it. As far as he knew, he's like, I watch this guy play for Tottenham like every Saturday and he's really good. And Ledley was great. But he couldn't train. He hadn't trained. By this point, it was 2010. He hadn't really trained since like 2006.
Yeah.
What Ledley used to do, he used to like go and train, say on like a Thursday, do like a light warm up, rest the Friday, and then play the Saturday. But it got so bad for him. What would happen with Ledley is he'd essentially take the week off. He'd go in a swimming pool on a Friday, and just play football on a Saturday.
That's
and
crazy.
Invariably be our best player, by the way. But so when Capello called him up, he was like, "Yeah, you're good enough to play for England," and clearly he was. But what Capello didn't get was that he needed like complete rest and recuperation. It was just like, get through the game and then the swelling will be terrible for 7 days. But even think about it in terms of a tournament. Someone like Ledley, unfortunately, wasn't suitable for tournament football, right?
It's every 3-4 days or something in tournament football?
But what Harry Redknapp used to do, he used to be selective about when he played him. So quite often, if Tottenham had like a routine home fixture on one weekend and it was going to be like the next 2 weekends were going to be like big games, he'd give him like 10 days off. Yeah. So just get yourself ready for the bigger ones and stuff. So I think if you look at that season, I think Ledley, he managed to play about 25 times for us that season. He played like every game against like Big Six opponent and stuff.
And then sat out some of the other ones.
Yeah, exactly that. So Ledley did get a call up though, but Capello didn't really understand how to manage it. Then he coached Jamie Carragher out of retirement. Jamie Carragher, who had actually retired from England duty when McLaren was manager because he was too upset that Ledley King, ironically, got picked above him.
Was that the reason?
That's what the legend of the story is. Wow. Jamie Carragher, you can let us know if that's true or not. But I think Ledley got picked over him for a game in Estonia, if I remember correctly. And Carragher was like, yeah, sod it.
He's done.
I think he got the hump that he'd he'd been called up, and it was like Estonia, and it was it could have been a summer holiday, and he never played and stuff. Okay, I get it a bit. So Ledley plays the first game against USA, goes off injured at half-time, Carragher replaces him. Then Carragher, I think, got injured as well, and then Matthew Upson had to come into the team. It was bare bones stuff. I think Dawson was in the squad, and I don't think he'd even had an appearance.
He didn't even get one, no?
No. He did play for England later on.
Yeah,
but I don't think he played for England at that time.
Okay.
He was in the squad with no caps, I think. Because I think he was called up, I think, for Rio Ferdinand as a late replacement because Rio Ferdinand had got injured. So, yeah, it became an absolute mess at centre-back. And anyone who's seen the Germany game will see Terry and Upson trying to chase after the likes of Klose and Podolski, etc. Yeah, it was a problem. And obviously the tournament didn't go well, right, in South Africa.
Just before we get into that, can you remember a bit around like what expectations were like going into that tournament? Oh, okay, low as well, yeah.
Low, I think, yeah, because we hadn't been at the last one. There was a feeling that the golden generation was not gone, but Ferdinand had got injured. Yeah, Terry certainly wasn't at the end of his career, nowhere near, but it felt like their peak had gone. Gerrard and Lampard and Rooney were still strong players, but we'd moved on, say, from Michael Owen had gone by this point, etc. I think Gary Neville would have been gone by this point. So there was a movement on. There was also zero confidence with the goalkeeper situation.
Yeah, true.
With Rob Green, David James and Joe Hart went. Green obviously committed the complete howler against the USA, conceding the long-range effort from Clint Dempsey. David James came into the team for the forthcoming games after. Joe Hart should have played. Joe Hart had an outstanding season on loan at Birmingham from Manchester City. I think he might have even been in team of the season. And he should have played, but it was, he's only played a year at Birmingham. That would have been
a big step up though, right?
Yeah, but fast forward 2-3 months,
True.
He's taken Shea Given out of the Man City team, and he's playing in European football regularly for a team that then qualified for the Champions League that year. So it was like straight after the tournament, Joe Hart went in goal. And I know people remember Joe Hart at the end, which regressed quite badly.
Before that, he was fantastic.
Joe Hart, over that period, sort of 2010 to about 2014-15, was outstanding in goal. Goalkeeping then very different to expectation now. Pep obviously bombed him off basically as soon as he got there. But Joe Hart should have played in goal in that tournament for England. I specifically remember that. So the goalkeeping issue was a problem. The centre-back issue was a problem. Up front, we didn't really have the quality. We had Rooney, obviously, but Emil Heskey started.
Yeah, who else would have been the forward options in that squad?
Jermaine Defoe.
Yep.
Who, again, for me, probably should have played over Heskey. But I got the idea with Heskey, you take the pressure off of Rooney and bring other people into play.
Was Crouch involved?
Crouch was in the squad. Heskey got picked over him. It was the same. Crouch also wasn't at the level as he was, say, for the previous World Cup in 2006. And it felt like there was a lot of players like that. So I think expectation was quite low, but the expectation was that we would piss the group. There was the famous headline in one red top newspaper, which was written as EASY, which stood for England, Algeria, Slovenia, Yanks. That was the headline after the draw.
I think I remember this Algeria game. Was that 0-0?
I'm glad you remember it because, my goodness.
It was 0-0, right?
It's probably the worst 0-0 anyone's ever watched. It's the worst Friday night anyone's ever had.
I don't remember watching the US game live. I remember the Rob Green mistake, actually. But the Algeria game, I weirdly remember watching that live.
It was horrendous. So we drew 1-1 with USA. Despite Steven Gerrard, from a Heskey assist, admittedly, giving us the lead really early on, the Algeria game was horrendous. And we played Slovenia in the last game in Port Elizabeth in a pitch that was cutting up really badly whilst trying to play with this stupid beach ball. This fucking Jabulani does my head. And whenever I watch clips, I can't...
I've still got one.
Every time I watch anything from that tournament, it's all I can think about.
I've got one in my family house shed, actually.
The first highlight I saw from any of the games, the ball just bounced up like about 8 yards in the air. It's like, what's going on?
I think of Diego Forlan with that ball.
You know what people don't remember from that when Lampard obviously had the one that went over the line against Germany, it's a free kick he took in the second half. It was about 40 yards that hit the bar.
Yeah, I can't remember that.
2-1 down. You can barely see the ball move. He's one of them. He's caught beautifully. It was like a tournament where people were just like shooting from everywhere and the ball was going wherever it went.
It was like a frisbee, wasn't it?
Like, honestly, it was so bad. It was sorry to everyone out there, but that was a shit tournament. I won't be told differently. The football ruined it. That's not an excuse for England. But yeah, we played Slovenia in Port Elizabeth, cut up pitch, beach volley football, bit of a mess. we need to win against Slovenia from this group that was meant to be easy. Like, to say that it would have been disastrous if we'd lost that.
Understatement.
They would have had to review Capello's position because it would have been unacceptable to not win any of them 3 football matches. He brought Jermaine Defoe into the team, he brought James Milner into the team, and Defoe scored from a Milner cross. In fact, Defoe should have scored in the second half as well. Wayne Rooney hit the post. England didn't play too badly, but only better than what it had been, and hung on grimly towards the end. This included a quite iconic moment when John Terry tried to block one particular shot with his head.
Like a diving fish, yeah.
Everybody remembered, which simultaneously showed his commitment to the cause.
I rate that.
But also simultaneously showed the mess that England were in.
Very true.
So we get through, we play Germany, and expectation was so low. Really was bad. Like, I went out and watched it and the pub wasn't packed. People really thought we were going to get done quite badly, and that's the way it panned out. They reviewed his position, Capello, but decided ultimately to carry on with him because essentially his first and biggest remit was to get the nation qualified again, and he'd done it, and actually qualified very convincingly.
That's why I asked about like expectations going into the tournament, and then like I didn't actually ask, but yeah, what would the objective have been? Like you said, was it literally just to qualify? Because when they then qualified, what would the objective have been in that tournament?
I don't think you've heard FAs in the past say, like, our objective is to win something in the next 6 years or something. I think when Capello took over, the only objection was like, we can't have that again. First and foremost, get this win in football. But it obviously appointed someone who was a winner.
Yeah.
His CV in terms of what he'd achieved at Milan, Madrid, and other clubs in Serie A spoke for itself. So ultimately, I guess they were getting him in, hoping that he'd lead England to a tournament victory at some point. But I don't recall there being we'll target to win the World Cup in 2014. I don't recall anything like that. Whereas I think those targets had been put in place for other managers previously.
Sure.
He qualifies really well for the next Euros as well. But it has some messes along the way, which included only needing a draw in the final game against Montenegro and being 2-0 up at half-time and being pretty comfortable and nearly pissing it up the wall after Wayne Rooney got himself sent off for lashing out. That would mean that Rooney missed the first 2 games of the actual European Championship. But there was more controversy. And there'd always been suspicion off the pitch about him. One of the big things that didn't help around 2010 was this Capello index.
I'd seen that in an article, but I have no memory of what that was.
It was basically a statistical model that ranked how well England players and players at the World Cup would perform. And it was over like 105 metrics or something.
And he put this together himself with his team and
supposedly he'd not put the model together, but he was asked on the criteria, I believe, and it became known as the Capello Index. The ratings were never actually released till after the tournament, but still it did get released after the tournament that then showed who Capello thought was England's best player in the tournament and who he thought would perform bad. So Robert Green got like the worst rating. Okay, we also made a mistake. I don't think Robert Green needed to read that from the manager. Yeah. I think Jermaine Defoe was the highest rated player, despite because only came and starting the Slovenia and the Germany games. So that, I think, didn't help relations. Obviously, in South Africa as well, you hear lots of stories about the players saying they were just cooped up with absolutely nothing to do. He, as I said, he took away like ketchup and stuff like that from the players. So there was no enjoyment. It had gone from 2006, where all the wives were out there in Baden-Baden in Germany, to I think it was Bloemfontein they might have been staying in. It was just like, train and then you're locked up and you're doing nothing.
Oh, so families were not allowed and stuff?
Anything.
Wow.
Don't think so. So it was a really unenjoyable experience for the players. So there was friction over that. I think the FA were wary about that. Then things came to a head after Mr. Terry got himself into more trouble. This time because of a racist comment, which I think most people could mouth read, that was said to Rio Ferdinand's brother or cousin?
Brother
Anton Ferdinand, in the game between Queen's Park Rangers and Chelsea, where supposedly Anton had been winding him up about the Wayne Bridge thing. What Terry said back was obviously completely unacceptable. The FA, after investigating, stripped Terry of the England captaincy without discussing that they would do so with Capello. Capello resigned off that basis, that they'd not necessarily gone behind his back.
Undermined him,
was
maybe?
it was a decision that had to be made, but it was undermined. It was making the decision for him. I also felt if that was a bit from the FA almost putting the pressure on, where they were making a decision where Euro 2012 was possibly going to be his ending as well. There was then a huge groundswell for Harry Redknapp to take the job. The FA didn't want to go down that route because he was being investigated for the offshore tax money and the Rosie 47 account. But he was doing very well with Tottenham at the time and had got Tottenham in the Champions League. Tottenham would finish fourth that year. But ultimately, the FA went with the safer hands of Roy Hodgson. And England's performances in tournaments over that forthcoming period didn't get any better until the man with the waistcoat came in and we actually did something decent. I think Capello is remembered as probably one of England's worst managers, I think.
Remembered as one of the worst?
I think so, yeah, because I think it's all you remember really is the 2010. I think what he changed for England was that qualification for 2010 when we beat Croatia well in the 2 games was the last time England went into a qualification campaign with fear. That we might not make it. So I think he changed that. The 2 qualification periods were like successfully navigated really routinely, and I think it's been that way for England ever since. So maybe he changed that perspective for the positive. But yeah, all you remember is 2010 World Cup was ultimately dreadful.
Yeah.
The only other 2 games that truly mattered was, he beat Croatia home and away very handsomely, and the bloke before him, who was a bloke who held up an umbrella, had failed. So it just feels like a period in England history that lasted, circa 4 years or so, and it's largely just remembered basically because we lost to Germany.
Yeah, it's interesting because of how well he did in his club career, but then you speak a little bit like his man management style for England, I'm guessing wasn't too dissimilar to his man management style at clubs, right? I would just make an assumption that he probably manages players in the same way for both club and country. I wonder why it was so disappointing for England compared to the success he had at a club level.
I think you probably can instill behaviours quicker at club level. I think at international level as well, you can't just bin someone out.
True.
Well, it's going to be questions. If you'd suddenly go, I'm not going to pick Steven Gerrard for whatever reason. Okay, what's your reason? What would people have felt about that sort of thing? I'm not saying Steven Gerrard would cause him trouble. He'd probably be the last one, actually. But yeah, it wouldn't be so easy, I don't think. It's also worth saying, the individual quality of player that he did have in that AC Milan team particularly was incredible. It was probably the best defence that's ever lived in club football. Plus you had Gullit, Van Basten, etc. They weren't bad.
Yeah.
They could play. You might have got a tune out of them, Clayton, maybe.
I'm not sure about that.
I just think, that if Capello had got the England job when, say, a Graham Taylor done it, then maybe, he might have done very well around that period. He was $6.5 million a year he was on.
Yeah. Was that a record?
It's astronomical. Mate. I don't know if who's going to get it next. I don't know if it'd be
Pep,
more.
if it ever happens.
I don't think Gareth Southgate was on more than that.
No, I don't think he was. I think Pep would get that. It's interesting. He obviously...
Pep could walk in the room and ask for whatever the fuck he wants and just give it to him.
100%.
Yeah.
He then went to Russia after his England stint, didn't he?
He basically did nothing after.
Yeah. That's what, because I was looking...
He managed one of the Super League clubs in China as well.
Yeah, Jiangshan Suning.
Yeah, easy for you to say. That lot.
I was Googling it because I couldn't remember what he did after. And yeah, you're right. He didn't really go on to do much. He was at Russia for the Russia manager for 3 years. And that Chinese club, I just butchered the pronunciation on.
I don't think there was an upset when he went. I don't think. I think as well, unlike with Sven, who obviously grasped the language really well, Capello, it was quite broken and difficult, I think, with him. You couldn't build a rapport or a feeling towards him or anything. It just felt like he was leading you for an outcome-based situation where he needed to be winning football matches. So I think actually people were quite happy to then go back afterwards. But I don't think it should deter the FA now if they want to look at an overseas appointment. No way at all. And I think it is interesting, and we might talk about it more tomorrow, that their remit was very clear about experience within the Premier League, which someone like a Thomas Tuchel, if they decide that's who it is and he agrees to it, clearly has that. So that would be a difference from Ericsson and Capello coming from the outside and having to learn it.
Yeah.
So I think, overseas is fine as long as it's probably had some experience here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, obviously I don't have my own memories to kind of form my own opinion on how I remember his period, but I'm sure I remember when I was reading his win rate was one of the highest.
Oh, yeah, great.
Because of all the qualifiers and stuff, right? But
then look at who England played.
Yeah.
I mean, that qualification group, I think for 2012, I think Switzerland was the main opponent. There's games in there with your Belaruses, your Kazakhstan, stuff like that. These are games obviously England should be winning.
Yeah, fair.
And it was quite straightforward other than pretty much the Croatia games, which were navigated successfully. That was a really good night at Wembley when we beat Croatia 5-1. I don't think Wembley's probably not had an England atmosphere like that for a qualifier since.
For a qualifier,
yeah,
no.
Qualifier.
Yeah.
And probably never, arguably maybe never will again.
No, and we've spoken about this a bit in the last couple of weeks, right? I think it's just because England now, in qualifying, a lot of the games are a non-contest.
I got a suggestion for changing it. Take the fucking games back around the country, out of Wembley. Have your biggest qualifier at Wembley if you want, and when we play others, take it around the country.
Apparently the atmosphere at St James's Park, I forgot who England were playing that night, but apparently it was really good. Literally this summer.
It will be, because then it's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, England are playing at St James's.
It was
something new.
It was the final warm-up game or the penultimate warm-up game before they went to the Euros at St James's Park, and I forgot who it was against.
There's so many good stadiums everywhere in this country now. I mean, realistically, with all due respect, if you're playing a really low-ranked club, can you have it at Leicester or Southampton or even these sides ground? Yeah, you can. Make a better atmosphere. The Welsh fans will tell you that. They've kind of made Cardiff City a much better home for them than, say, the Millennium Stadium or Principality, wherever it's called now, because it didn't need a 70,000 seat. It needed something a bit more tense at 30,000. Who wants to see England play Andorra's in front of 80,000 and stuff?
Yeah, it's
No, take it to, Nottingham Forest. Give Forest an England game, whatever.
Why
whomever.
don't they do that? Is it a commercial thing because of Wembley
Money,
rights?
darling. Money, darling. Money.
But they'd still get...
When the FA rebuilt Wembley and it was complete, that part of the deal was the England games and FA Cup semi-finals had to be played at Wembley for 15 years. That's gone.
Yeah.
But the reality is they'll make more money from Wembley than anywhere else. They're not bothered if only 60,000 turn up at Wembley, because that's more than they'd make having a full house at Nottingham Forest.
Well, that's the answer then, isn't it? Like that for their...
It's money.
Yeah.
The whole game's about money.
It is, unfortunately, but it is what it is.
Cheers.
Thought you were going to cheers me there.
Go on, Ed, if you will, to Don Fabio and his shit England reign. Super. Tomorrow we'll be talking a bit more England on the Clayton and James show. We'll be talking some other topics. I'm going to throw a bit of FPL challenge stuff your way, actually.
Okay.
Clates, yeah.
Nice.
Sparta Prague is Euro Club in focus. We have on this day and a few other little bits as well. But just leaves me to say thanks very much, Clates. Be nice to each other, everyone. Cue music, please, man child.